My name is Stepan Bolotnikov. I'm presently working at a company called Splunk, where my title is kind of a mouthful. It's Senior Accessibility Front-End Engineer. And before that, I have been working as a software engineer, very heavily focusing on the front end of web applications in many different places, small companies, big companies, design agencies, whatever, startups, for a little bit over 15 years. 15, 1 5, not 50, just in case. For the past 2 years in Splunk, I have been specifically working on accessibility. That has been my primary concern, my primary work thing. And it's been a very, very fun and very interesting journey, a lot of learning, a lot of realization, I think. And today I'm very excited to talk about accessibility. The idea behind this webinar was that in one of the companies that I used to work for, actually, as part of the onboarding, there was a mandatory webinar as well and some kind of training about accessibility. And I remember that during this webinar, when we were introduced to what accessibility is, how to think about accessibility and such, then one of the people raised their hand and he asked, "Okay, but I am a backend engineer. I am a backend engineer. I don't write user interfaces. I don't do front end. Why am I on this webinar right now? How is it important to me? And what am I supposed to do as part of my work to also be part of this accessibility at our company?" And the presenter back then didn't really know exactly how to answer that, tailored to that person's role. And that made me think about how accessibility is, well, first of all, it's often not even talked about at all. But when it is talked about, then there's often a bit of confusion of whose responsibility is it to talk about accessibility, to think about accessibility, and to make accessibility happen. So what I want to talk about today is, first of all, I don't know who you people are. I assume there's a big variety of roles, experience levels, knowledge levels. So we'll go into something that hopefully everybody, no matter what their experience or level is, can take away from here. We'll talk about what accessibility is, first and foremost. We'll go into why accessibility is important as part of software development and just software product development in general. We'll talk about what it is important for people of any skill levels or any technical or non-technical roles to know about what it takes to make accessible technology. And we'll talk about specifically what roles do different people have when it comes to accessibility and how you can understand a bit better the connection between what you might be doing at work or in your projects and how that clicks into accessibility. So before we get to the second, third, fourth topic, we first need to understand what it is that we're actually talking about. What is accessibility and what's the end goal? Where are we going with this? So when I was preparing for this presentation, whenever I prepare for some kind of a presentation, I first like to go over definitions. So I just go to Wikipedia or something, just punch in the word and see what it says there. It's a good source of information. And when I went to Wikipedia for accessibility, the definition given there is that accessibility is the design of products, devices, services, vehicles, or environments to be usable by disabled people. And I want to highlight this last part of the sentence. If we look at this sentence, then okay, we can kind of abstract away the products, devices, services, let's just say things. And let's ignore the design part, let's just say make. So let's say that accessibility is making things to be usable by disabled people. But what does it mean to be a disabled person? Who are these disabled people? Well, we can have a look at another definition. The disability in Wikipedia, again, is described as the experience of any condition that makes it more difficult for a person to do certain activities or have equitable access within a given society. That's a lot of words. It's not very easy to understand exactly what we might be talking about here. And what I want to focus on when talking about disability is that often when I explain to my parents or friends or whoever what it is I do at work as an accessibility engineer, it's hard to give a very good explanation. And my go-to is like, okay, so I make websites, I make web applications, and I make them so that blind people can use them. This is not the only thing. This is far from the only thing, but it is an easy way to get into what it is that I do at work every day. And I describe it through the lens of talking about people who have a hard time seeing or some other actions. And actually, a popular way to frame it, there's two different schools of thought, two different understanding of what a disability even is. And the first one I think is a bit more popular or a bit more understood is the medical model of disability. And the model of disability says that disability is a flaw in a person, or it's some kind of like an innate um, descriptor of a specific person. It is something that is coming from that person or their states, the way they are, and it's something that needs treatment or maybe needs some special accommodations versus something or someone that is normal to make them to help them interact with the world in a normal way, so to say. And the other school of thought, the other model of disability is the social model of disability that says that disability is not a part of a person, but disability is a flaw in the environment surrounding the person. So it is not something that is wrong with the person, that they cannot do something or they cannot access something. It is something wrong with the environment or society or technology surrounding the person that does not allow them access to some information or some services or something like that. And I really much prefer the social model of disability. It helps us to talk about access in a very specific way and in a very much more equitable way, I believe. And it's talking that the problem is not with people, but the problem is with the unaccommodating physical or societal barriers that are preventing people access. Another way that you can think about this is like this. You could say about something that I am disabled because of something, something, something. I have this disability. Or you can say that I am experiencing disability. I am not able to get access to some information, to use some tool, or to use some computer, website, or application because something is preventing me from doing that. Okay, but what could be a disability? What kind of obstacles are there that people can have in getting access to information or applications or services or computers? The truth is that there can really be no exhaustive list. We cannot just start writing different disabilities, different kinds of disabilities, and then hope to get to the end. And now we have all of them written down. This is it. And then when you're talking to someone about a disability that they might experience, you can show them the list and ask, okay, can you point to a specific point here? What is it that you are having problems with? We can't really do that. There's really an infinite amount of different things that can be preventing people access to stuff, to information or services. And a disability is anything. A disability is anything, whatever is preventing a specific person or a group of people access. The most popular things or the most well-known things, I guess, that we talk about are, for example, sensory disabilities. So being blind or having some sort of visual disorder, partially blind, colorblind, being deaf, not being able to hear, not being able to touch. Maybe there's a sensory issue, or maybe you don't have a hand or you don't have a finger. Motor disabilities, you might find it hard to move your body. You might find it hard to move a part of your body or have control over specific, very fine motor skills of, for example, your hand or your fingers. And also, for example, cognitive disabilities, something that affects a person's attention, something that affects a person's memory, their ability to focus. or different learning disabilities such as dyslexia that would make it very hard for a person to read text or to write text or to tell the difference between different elements, for example, on the screen. But also, in addition to that, we can think about disability as any number of things, any number of temporary little distractions, temporary illnesses, whether it's something that affects the way you talk or the way you see, how you feel. Noisy environment can be a disability for and can prevent you from accessing audio information, for example. Difficult language or difficulties in understanding language, just unclear instructions, really. And then any number of societal factors such as age, class, race, gender, how you express yourself. All of these could be seen as disabilities in the way that um, certain services or tools can prevent you access or make it not as easy for you to get access to them due to you experiencing one of these things. I've seen this image often when talked about accessibility, and I quite like it because it explains a bit more of a wide variety of what could be seen as disabilities. A lot of people typically only think about really the permanent disabilities when talking about different kinds of disabilities. For example, yes, if you don't have one arm, then permanently you would not be able to touch anything with that arm. And you only have one arm to manipulate objects or tools or such. But at the same time, maybe you do have both arms. It's just that one of them is injured. You're still temporarily disabled. Or what is my favorite category of disabilities, maybe, is situational. Maybe you're a new parent, you are holding a baby, you have hands, you have working hands, but one of your hands are preoccupied. And the same thing goes for other kinds of disabilities as well. And when we talk about people who cannot see, are partially blind or fully blind, sure, that is a visual disability. They experience it and it prevents them from seeing stuff. But also, if you are a distracted driver, then you are also not able to see certain things in your environment. You are paying attention to a specific thing. If we talk about deaf people who cannot hear, yes, that is experiencing a disability related to hearing. But at the same time, if you are in a noisy environment, in a bar, in a public somewhere, then you are also not able to interact with audio content, for example. And when it comes to speaking or communicating, you can be nonverbal, or also you could have a heavy accent, you could have hiccups, or you could have just a sore throat that prevents you from speaking. All of these could be disabilities. And I think all of us will experience one of those things at least at some point in our lives. So the truth comes down to the fact that nobody can actually be not disabled, or nobody can actually not experience disabilities. The only thing that you can be is you can be temporarily abled. You are in perfect health, you are in a good environment, you are feeling good, you have good focus, you have all of the tools you need, you have everything, the light, the sound and everything is exactly as you need for whatever it is you're doing. You are able to do it for now, where you are right now. Any number of factors can change, and suddenly you will not be able to interact with stuff as well as you did before, and you start experiencing a temporary disability, whether it's, as we said before, noise or sickness or anything like this. So, because of this, when talking about accessibility, I actually like to circle back to the definition of universal design, which, again, by Wikipedia actually, is the practice of creating products, environments, and systems, just things, that are inherently accessible and usable by everyone, regardless of age, ability, or status, without requiring adaptation. So, universal design and also accessibility is building things, building products, building projects already from the ground up, trying to make them so that anyone, regardless of how many disabilities they do or do not experience, how old they are, where they are from, could use those products or services or projects. And another thing that I wanted to click into that is something called the curb cut effect. So when we're talking about accessibility and building accessible either digital or physical products, the curb cut effect is something that when you introduce an accommodation that is meant for a specific type of people who has experienced a specific type of disability, then a lot of the time, what happens is actually this accommodation benefits so many other people who might not be related to that group at all. This term comes from 1970s, I believe, in the US, where in Berkeley, California, there was a, an activist group who started installing these curb cuts or these ramps. Because before that, in Berkeley at least, what they had is you have the driveway and you have the walkway and quite a high curb that is supposed to, separate the cars from the people. But then when you have to cross the street, well, you have to go down the curb and you go up a curb. And there was a group of disability activists who well, the story goes is that they actually took the matters into their own hands and they destroyed some of the curbs to make these ramps to make it accessible to people who are using wheelchairs. But nowadays, in most cities, I think we have curb cuts, and I think everybody can agree that this is useful for absolutely everybody, not just wheelchair users. I go with a bicycle somewhere. I love that there's a curb cut. If you have a heavy piece of luggage, you definitely don't want to like raise it over a curb. If you are walking with your child or stroller, this is also something that benefits you directly. And we can see this curb cut effect in so many different places where people have developed environments with accessibility in mind. For example, well, right now on this call, we have closed captions. We have subtitles that are live transcribing what I am saying. This technology was intended for people who cannot hear. But personally, whenever I watch TV these days, I always have the closed captions on anyway for myself, even though I can hear. But it makes it also easier to understand a language that you're not a native speaker of. It makes it easier to watch videos when you're on a bus or whatever other noisy environment. So again, everybody benefits from that. And we see this again and again when we talk about technologies and environments that are built with accessibility in mind. But let's focus on digital accessibility. This is what I'm primarily speaking here about. Digital accessibility is often abbreviated as A11Y or Ali. Some people don't like when you pronounce it Ali. I actually like it. It sounds like a name, it sounds like a friend. So A11Y or Ali, either works. The 11 there is the number of letters between A and Y. And it's the practice of creating digital content, I would say, products and services, so that they can be used by everyone regardless of their ability. And it's a practice of removing barriers and obstacles and proactively building accessible experiences for everybody. So this is the baseline. This is what we came here to talk about. All right, but why should people care? Right? This is a question that actually does get asked a lot when talking about accessibility. Why are we talking about this? Why is it important? And there are a couple of different reasons, a couple of different factors that I would like to highlight. Number one, there's kind of like an ethical responsibility almost that we as creators, as builders, as engineers, developers, whatever, have. Hopefully, the past couple of slides already showed you that everybody can experience disabilities, and technology, in ideal, really should serve to empower people, not gatekeep them from information. Because everybody experiences disabilities, then it just kind of comes naturally from that it would be good, objectively speaking, good, to build technology in a way that is accessible so that everybody can use it. You get older, your eyes get worse, you still want to use the computer. Your hands maybe start shaking, you still want to be able to use your phone, and all of the technology should already expect that there will be different people with different abilities using it and should account for that from the beginning. Hopefully, this is an easy argument, but unfortunately, this argument is often not enough to convince people that accessibility is important to think about. Okay. Let's talk about numbers. Let's talk about specific legal things. The fact is that there are many laws across the world that specifically target accessibility, whether it's physical accessibility in public spaces or it's digital accessibility in public services. The two big ones, probably important ones to know, are the Americans with Disabilities Act, which goes super far back. It's a pretty old legislation. It started as a physical accessibility initiative, but nowadays it also includes digital spaces, and also European Accessibility Act, EAA, that came into effect last year. There are differences. There are differences between these two, and also there are other laws in different countries across the world that handle accessibility differently. But important to know is that these kinds of legislations require services to be compliant with specific accessibility requirements and document the state of their accessibility. So if you are building a service, there is a baseline that you have to ensure works, and you also might need to provide some documents saying, we have tested our thing, this is what it does, these are the problems that we maybe still have, but this is how we plan to fix them. And if you're not compliant with these acts and you are in the place where the compliance is requested, for example, in the European Union with the European Accessibility Act, then non-compliance with that can result in actual fines for the company, or, for example, also inability to work with public sector. So if your service is something that might be used by government agencies, education, or military, for those kind of organizations, accessibility is often a much harder legal requirement. So they might not be able to even work with you at all if you are not compliant with these accessibility laws. One fun example is a case in the US from 2012. It was National Association of the Deaf versus Netflix. It the court case itself, I believe, took about 2 years to complete. And in the end, what it resulted is that under ADA, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, streaming services were established as public spaces. And that means that under ADA, they must provide certain accommodations. Netflix, let's say, lost this battle, and they resolved to provide closed captions or subtitles for all of their content by 2014, I believe. And they also had to pay a fine of $755,000 in fees and damages. And we all know what that means now. Now, Netflix and other streaming services always have closed captioning. They didn't used to before, and it's not something that came out just as of someone's good intentions, unfortunately, but there was actually a pretty big landmark legal case that enforced this to happen. And now we all benefit from that, actually. I use captions on Netflix all the time, YouTube, all of these things. Another factor of services and products that comes in touch with accessibility is quality. And this is actually my own personal story of how I got into accessibility, I guess, because I was an engineer already for over 10 years, and I was really proud of my work. I really liked doing my work. And at some point, I discovered that accessibility was really not something that I personally put that much attention into. I wasn't that knowledgeable about it. And when I discovered what it all means as an engineer to be thinking in terms of accessibility, then for me personally, it just became this very interesting, very fun and engaging personal challenge, almost, I would say, to see, okay, but now I want the stuff that I build to be accessible, to be good. What does that mean? What can I learn from it? What can I learn from it as an engineer? What can I learn from it as a user? What can I learn from it as a person? And for me, it was personally very fun shift to really start paying more attention to it. And when you think in terms of accessibility, then very often it forces us to consider other quality metrics and just to increase the quality of our product in general. Again, it comes down to the curb cut effect, essentially. But another thing is that fixing a bug, fixing some sort of an accessibility or functional problem can be up to 30 to 100 times more expensive than just sitting down and taking the time and planning for that situation from the very beginning. So when you start your products, when you start your work with accessibility and quality in mind, then you save money and time down the line as well. This is taken from a study by National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's a number that's pretty often quoted when talking about quality in software specifically. And then, of course, there is a business case. A question that we hear sometimes when talking about accessibility is like, yes, but what does that do for businesses? What does that mean as a business case? And the answer is pretty simple. Accessibility just results in a better user experience for everybody. And it also opens up a much bigger audience because if you don't think in terms of accessibility, you're inherently locking some people out of your service or your product, and they cannot interact with it. They cannot use it. They cannot be paying customers in the end. And that's the business case. There are numbers attached to it. There have been studies done to that, but I didn't want to get too nitty-gritty into the numbers. Okay, so accessibility is important. Hopefully, you at least partially agree with me here. But what does that actually mean to be accessible? How do we measure accessibility? How can we say whether something is accessible or not? Well, that's a little bit more complicated of a question from the beginning. Because as we looked at before already, disabilities can come in any number of different forms. People can experience very different accessibilities, and we cannot just put them all in a list. Technologies also come in very different form factors. You have computers, you have smartphones, you have various other technologies, you have specific um points of contact with technology, and they all look different, they all behave different, they all have different interfaces. So, how do you summarize accessibility objectively? Very hard. The answer to that is that, of course, there is not one specific definition that would cover all digital accessibility. But the good news is that technology platforms would often come with their own guidance and understanding of what it means to build accessible experiences for that platform and how to approach that. So if you are building something for the iPhone, then the Apple design system comes with very specific instructions on how to build it accessibly. If you are building some physical interface, then there's a different set of principles that you should follow. I'm a web front-end engineer, and I mostly deal with web accessibility. And this is also what we will focus on here, because I think also web accessibility is a good example of how we can talk about accessibility and how we can measure accessibility. So when it comes to websites and web applications, the way you ensure that your website or application is accessible is you look at Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's abbreviated WCAG. I just say WCAG most of the time. People have a couple of different weird pronunciations of this acronym because it's not very easy to say out loud. But Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is an internationally recognized standard for accessible user interfaces on the web. It's developed by the World Wide Web Consortium and a big group of volunteers and professionals, and it's just available for everybody to read online. Most of the laws, I think actually all of the laws worldwide that refer to digital accessibility, they use WCAG as a baseline to explain what it is to make accessible user interfaces and how to go about this. The latest version of WCAG is 2.2. I forgot when it was released. I'm sorry, but it is a standard that lives and evolves and betters over time. And WCAG describes itself basically as a set of something that's called success criteria or SC. And one success criteria is basically this is what your interface should be like in order to be considered accessible. These are some of the components that should be present, or this is something that should not happen. And when your application is not meeting some kind of success criterion, then it's called a violation. And because looking at accessibility of a specific application through web content accessibility guidelines, we look at this set of success criteria, and when one of them is not met, then we know exactly what the problem is, and it is very easy for us to refer back to, hey, this is not accessible because it's not meeting this specific success criteria. And then from there, we can already see what needs to be changed, what needs to be improved, and how to move to make it more accessible as per WCAG. So for example, let's just look at a really quick example of a success criterion in WCAG. This is 1.1.1 non-text content. And basically there's three parts to each success criterion. Number one is its number and name. So WCAG is organized into four core principles that we will talk about later. And principles are consisting of guidelines. And then guidelines have success criteria as part of them. So this one is 1.1.1, which means that it is under principle number one, perceivable. It is under the guideline 1.1, which talks about text alternatives, and the success criterion itself is 1.1.1, called non-text content. It's just a name to make it easier to refer to. WCAG has 87 success criteria. That's a big number. That's a lot to remember. I don't remember all of them. I don't remember most of them, actually. But that's okay. We'll get to why exactly that's okay. The second part is the level. Each success criterion has a level assigned to it. It goes from A to AA and to AAA. Whenever success criterion is A, that's the minimum standard. Basically, if you want your application to be accessible at all, if you care about accessibility even a little, then you should pass all of the SCs that are marked as level A. So for example, non-text content is level A. That's the baseline. It's the minimum possible thing that you should do in order to be considered at least a little bit accessible. AA or AA is the middle ground of it. It's kind of like the standard of accessibility. I think that's probably most of the success criterion are somewhere under AA. And AA is generally considered like a pretty good baseline. If you're building something, if you are evaluating something against accessibility standards, then AA is often considered good enough. AAA includes some success criteria that are pretty tough to meet or that are very, very specific and might not even relate to you and the kind of users that you're building for. So it is really good if you can build something that's compliant with AAA, but a lot of the times AA as a standard is considered enough. And then we have the description. What this SC, not relies to, what this SC relates to. And the descriptions would often include links, exceptions, examples to make it easier to understand. And there are whole articles about each single one of the success criterion that goes into much bigger detail. What it is, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and how to build products in a way that they are compliant with it. So for example, for non-text content, the description is all non-text content that is presented to the user must have a text alternative that serves the equivalent purpose, except for some exceptions. There's a big number of exceptions, so I didn't go into that. What does that mean? What is non-text content? You can see that non-text content is also a link here. Non-text content is anything that is not prose content. So that includes images, of course. That includes photos, icons, but that also includes stuff like, well, video, audio, or for example, emoticons or like ASCII art. Whenever text is used to convey not words, not like human language, but some kind of image, pictogram, or a chart, for example. All of that is non-text content. And when you use non-text content on the web, then you have to present the user with a text that explains what it is, that helps them understand what it is. So for example, I'm sure you've seen that a lot of applications these days have buttons that just have an icon. This example on the left is from Google, just Google Gmail, I think. And a lot of the times we have been living through the evolving of technology for so long that we already kind of instinctively know what these icons mean. You know, a square is usually stop, an arrow is usually play. This thing is a list, I think. That's how I understand it. But to a lot of people, icons might not be inherently understandable. So it's important that whenever you have a button that only has an icon, that you also include the text of what it is. There's many different ways to achieve that. What Google did in this example is you have a tooltip. If you mouse over this button, then this text below appears and says that, oh, this button opens Google Apps. Okay, that's cool. And the other example is photos. This is taken from Wikipedia, is that whenever you have some kind of an image, some kind of a photo, then you really should have a textual caption that relates to the image, that explains what it is in the image and describes what could be seen there. Okay, 87 SCs is a lot. So I'm not going to go through 87 success criteria, don't worry. But there should be something that we can maybe get a better grasp of the large picture of accessibility and how we can think about it. Good news is there is. I talked before how the success criterion in WCAG are divided into the four principles of accessibility. And these are kind of like very high level understandings of how you can maybe investigate some kind of user interface and see, is it accessible through these four lenses? It's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Pour, like pour a glass of water, for example. It's easy to remember. Let's go into a little bit of detail what each of them means. Perceivable means that content should be perceivable by at least two senses by each user. So a lot of people who have functioning eyes, who can see, then they perceive the content through sight. So you look at a screen and you see text, you see images, you see buttons, whatever. But if you don't, then the other primary sense that is used in this principle is hearing, because the computers have the ability to translate what is shown on screen into audio. They can read out. And the way this is done is that you really need to have text. Computers can read text. Computers can't really read images. There are ways to make them read images. Yes, we have AI and stuff like this. But the fact is that text is the most accessible medium. So whenever you have critical information, it really should be put together in text. And whenever you have information that is more visual, then you really need to have textual alternative to it also available. And the question you can ask when looking at some application is just like, would a blind person be able to know that this content even exists? If yes, then probably you are on a good track for meeting the perceivable criteria. If no, well, we need to look at what we need to change. Really quickly about why text is the most accessible medium. So some of the accessibilities that are often talked about is, for example, yes, people who are blind or hard of seeing in general. So how would they interact with web content and web applications? One example is a Braille screen display, which basically creates a row of Braille characters with tactile little bumps. And the computer can look at the text that is shown on the screen and then translate it into the bumps on the Braille display. And a person who can read Braille can then interact with the content like this. They can read documents, they can read chats, whatever. But again, this only works if you have the baseline text representation already. Or, for example, another thing that's very popular is a screen reader. Screen reading software just takes the text on the screen and reads it out to the user as audio. This screenshot shows the Splunk website, and there is focus on the top left part where there's the Cisco logo. So the Cisco logo is an image, and on the bottom left, you can see a little gray window that reads out Cisco logo. So this text, Cisco logo is the textual representation of that image, which is the logo. This was added there on purpose, and this allows screen reader software to take this image that is the logo and translate it into text so that the user can understand what is being shown on the screen. Sorry, next one. Okay, that was perceivable. Next is operable. Operable means that users should be able to operate all interactive controls without a mouse and without a touchscreen. Nowadays, a lot of people, when they interact with a computer, they use a mouse. It's easy, you point, you click. Or when you have a phone, then it's all touchscreens. And we are so used to having these interfaces. We're so used to having them. But there are many, many situations where a person might not be able to use those or doesn't want to use them as well. So making your interface operable with the keyboard actually automatically almost makes it operable with any other assistive technology. Some people might use their voice to control the computer. They can say, click some button, and then the computer understands what that button is and clicks on it. Some people who have, for example, mobility issues might use sort of a joystick or might use some other mobility accessive technology to interact with the web. And the truth is that when it comes to buttons, drop downs, maps, any sort of interactive interfaces, you have to make them accessible by keyboard. And it's easy to get into that. As a software engineer, I think that's the easiest thing to get started on. You can just take your mouse, put it somewhere far away from you, and then see, can you use your product without having to reach for the mouse by just using the keyboard? Take some practice, but you might learn to like that actually. There are some interactions that are sometimes more comfortable or faster with the keyboard. So again, it's not just for people who can't use a mouse, it's also for people who might not want to use a mouse. So the easy question to ask when evaluating some application for operable is, could a person without a mouse effectively use this interface? If no, well, we have to go back and we have to see what the problem is and how we can fix it. Okay, number 3, understandable. Information should be presented in a clear and logical way. Functionality should be predictable. And error states should be helpful, and the user should be able to understand what went wrong, why is there an error, and how to fix it. This understandable is very high level, really, and this plugs into much more than just engineering or developing of interfaces. It's in a very high level, like the information that you put on the screen, is it put there in a way that makes sense? Is it put there in a way that the user could use it and understand where to go for help, where to find some kind of options? Is functionality predictable? If you have a button, if you have different buttons or different controls in your application, do they always behave the same? Because if they don't, then user might not know how to use some control when they see it for the first time. So it's really important to make interfaces easy to learn and just predictable and logical in that sense. And then finally, R is robust. Content should be compatible with many technologies. Interactive elements must have clear programmatically determinable roles, names, and values. This, in contrast to the previous one, is very technical, actually. Essentially, what robust tells us is that when making web applications, the markup language that we use to create them, which most of the time is HTML, it must be semantically and syntactically correct. It must be correct so that the browser and the computer can understand it, and it must be semantically correct in the way that when you have an element where you input text, well, it should announce itself as a text input. There are so many ways to make just a plain block of text and then make it editable with JavaScript, for example. But if you don't take careful consideration into how to implement that, then you might create a situation that makes it hard for certain people to use this input. And this is a very simple example, but it also goes back to much more advanced interactive elements as well. Okay, so that's the 4 basic things of accessibility, but who is responsible for all of that? The popular misconception is that accessibility is really the responsibility of the front-end engineer and maybe the designer. Maybe, in some cases, the designer. But in reality, the best user experiences are, of course, created when everybody participates from the very beginning of the project till the very end, at every step of the way. So I really wanted to look at some of the different roles that maybe some of you here today do at work or are trying to get into, for example, and what those roles specifically might have to do with accessibility that is maybe often not talked about. And we can start from before any code is written, before anything is created. We can start from product. So people like product managers, product owners, or whoever is responsible for planning work, creating just the ideas of software or features, how do they interact with accessibility? Or what they should do in order to work in an accessible way? You should include accessibility in the requirements. When you're writing out the ideas, the requirements, and the specifications of applications or features, then it's important to include accessibility right there and then in the very beginning. So that from the very beginning, you have a vocabulary and your team can speak about what we are making and how to make it accessible and what are those little points that we might miss otherwise. You should make space for accessibility when it talks to planning. A lot of the time, you talk about only the very hard functional requirements of the product, but then at the end, there's not that much space or time to talk about accessibility of what you're making. So, as a product manager, as a product owner, it's your responsibility to make the space. When there is a planning meeting, when there is a planning get together of some sorts, you must put in the effort to put the accessibility on the points of the presentation, on the points of the document, so that there's space and time to talk about that and to notice that. And the way that I see these kinds of roles is that they're really the champions of the understandable principle. The questions such as, is this feature that we're building, is it understandable? Is the functionality predictable? And is it consistent across the different products that we have or the different pages, for example, that we have? Is the information flow logical? All of these questions come in play before the software is even developed. And it is very important for people such as product managers and product owners to think about that and to help their team talk about that from the very beginning. Then, okay, we have plans, we have specs, we know what we're building. We pass it on to design, visual design in that sense. So, what do designers do? Designers have to keep accessibility in mind at every step of the design process, which is a lot to take in. I understand that. It is a very important work and it is a lot of work. Designers should also be able to discuss the user interface with developers, and they should be documenting the interactions when the handover comes. So when you as a designer, you create a visual design of some feature, it's important to look at it and see that, okay, there are some parts of the design that might not be obvious how to make them operable, for example, or how to provide a text alternative to some non-text content on there. So the designer should really be able to talk with the developers to ask, hey, is this feasible? Um, does this make sense from a development standpoint? What should I change here to make it more accessible? And for example, hey, remember that this thing should have a tooltip so that the developers might not forget it that much. Designers, I think, are the champions of the perceivable principle. Are the colors accessible? You, as a designer, should check contrast. There are very specific requirements for contrast between the background color and the text color, for example. Is the information able to be understood without colors? When you drive around, the traffic lights is always red, green, and yellow. But red, green color blindness is the most popular way of color blindness. There's many people out there who cannot really tell the difference between red and green. So whenever you have some status information, for example, and you might have a knee-jerk reaction of, okay, it's bad, I'll make it red. It's good, I'll make it green. It's important to stop there and understand that it might not be understandable to many people. So we need to think of a of an alternative way to convey this information without color. Again, it's two senses. So, for example, in addition to making bad thing red, we should have an icon that also describes that it is bad. In addition to making a good thing green, we could write success in front of it so that it's more clear what is happening. Again, is the flow of information consistent, predictable, and logical in the way the UI is laid out? That's the responsibility of a designer. Is the size of text and controls sufficient? WCAG has requirements on how big the text should be and how big the controls should be. So the button should be of a specific minimum size, even if it's just an icon, so that a person could be able to use it with a small mouse or on a small, for example, touchscreen device easily. And another thing to ask is, does content adapt to different screen sizes and zoom levels? Because many people might resize the window on their laptop, but many people also zoom in to see better. Does your design account for that? And if not, how can you make it account for that? Quality assurance, QA, testing people, what they can do. You can test for accessibility, of course. You can include this in your automatic tests and also in your manual tests, and you should. An accessibility violation should be seen like any other bug. It's not different from something else breaking. It is a flaw in the system, and it should be treated as something that we should fix. Quality assurance people, I think, are champions of operable and robust principles. Can the interface be used with just a keyboard? Can the interface be used with a screen reader? What happens if I resize the window? And does this work on other devices? These are all the questions that quality assurance people have to ask and answer that helps us make more accessible interfaces. And then we come to front-end engineers. I am a front-end engineer. Good news, bad news situation. I try to think what specific principle front-end engineers are responsible for, and I'm afraid it's all of them. I'm afraid front-end engineers actually do have the most work to do when it comes to making accessible user interfaces. You need to use correct semantic markup. You need to provide text alternative to non-text content because you are the person who is actually implementing the UI, then it's mostly the responsibility on you to make sure these things can get in. Can the UI be used with just a keyboard? You are making the interactions. Did you just assign a click listener to a button, to some custom button, or can it also be used with a keyboard? Front-end engineers should always have a dialogue with the people in design and product so that there can be two-way communication so that you can ask, hey, I found this. I don't think we planned for it. It might be an accessibility problem. How do we fix it? And then you can go and solve it together. Very hopefully, front engineers should also have the ability to push back on requests for non-accessible features and to explain to the people who request that why it's important and why we need to go back and rethink it and how we can do that. And also to bring accessibility questions up in code reviews and planning. And now backend engineers, because I've heard people say before that as a backend engineer, what is my responsibility? Well, the way I like to look at it is that when you are building APIs, when you are building services, you are serving data, for example. You are not serving this data to the front end. You are not serving this data to the application. The data is being served for the end user. So when you are building out these services, you really need to think with the end user in mind. And this makes backend engineers champions of the understandable principle. The way the data is structured, can the user search? Can the user filter or paginate? Are the error states that are being returned from the backend, are they clear? Do they make it clear how to fix errors? Is the data itself structured in a clear and logical way to help the application or to help front-end engineers to present it in a clear and logical way? This is something that needs to be thought of in designing backend applications, and it very directly correlates to accessibility. Writing, copywriting, creative writing, it's very important to use clear language, but you know that. I can't teach you that. You know that better than me. But any people who are responsible for writing content, UI texts, anything like this, I see them as champions of the understandable principle. Does the user know where to find information? Are acronyms or some kind of industry-specific terms, are they explained? Are they used consistently? Are error states that we present clear? Is the tone of voice and is the vocabulary, are the words appropriate for the kind of people that we are building this product for? These are all of the questions that people responsible for text should be answering. And again, it's very related to accessibility. And then people who are responsible for processes. So this is human resource, hiring, management. You are not exempt. You also have a role to play in accessibility. Even if your design product engineering team is doing a great job and your users are taken care of, are your colleagues taken care of as well? When it comes to accessibility, it's very important to think about people immediately around you as well. You should make space and you should enable everyone to speak up about accessibility and for them to get accommodations that they might need as well due to the disabilities that they themselves experience. Process people, management, HR, hiring, really I see as champions of the understandable principles. Do the people around you, do your colleagues know how to find information, where to find information? Is the communication timely, clear, and consistent? Is it appropriate for the kind of people that you work with? Is it appropriate for everybody? Actually, that's the big question. And that is your responsibility. And well, it wouldn't be a presentation in 2026 without talking about AI, right? I'm sorry, I had to get this one in as well. There is a misconception that I've heard a couple of times that now we have AI tools. We have these multimodal agentic tools. We have ChatGPT, Claude, and all of these things. And it can help people who experience disabilities navigate any digital interface. So maybe we no longer even need people like me. Maybe we don't need accessibility engineers and we don't need to pay manual attention to it. The realities of situation is that yes, AI can be very helpful. I've seen people describe ChatGPT as like the best application for example, for blind people, because they were able to just ask it what is in front of me just on their phone, and then it describes in great detail. You are looking at a shop that says when it's open, where is the door. It can help people a lot. But the reality is that this technology is, first of all, not available for everyone. Second of all, not that reliable a lot of the time, just out of it being a connected technology. You have to be able to talk to a server most of the time. It's still not on your device. And it's definitely not all powerful. So I don't think that accessibility and AI tools need to be like this. We don't really have to be enemies about that. I think we can help each other. AI and accessibility can go hand in hand. AI actually benefits a lot from accessibility work. AI agents, such as Claude or ChatGPT, they primarily interact with text, especially when it comes to the web or user interfaces. When they search the web or when they use some web applications, then yes, they have the capability of, so to say, seeing images, for example, but it's much more efficient and much more reliable to interact with text. And again, as part of accessibility, one of the main core principles is that everything needs to have text alternative. Accessible user interfaces, therefore, they make programmatic access to this information much easier and much more reliable and much faster for AI agents. And it makes it also consume less energy, just work faster and be easier to use. And on the other hand, well, how does accessibility benefit from AI? It does. We do. Accessibility has always been on the bleeding edge of technology. A lot of technology and tools and services that everybody takes almost for granted these days started as some kind of accommodation for someone who experienced a specific kind of disability. For example, automatic captions. Right now on this call, there is an AI agent that is transcribing what I speak word by word. You don't even have to have your audio on. You can still interact with what I'm saying and you can see where we're going with this presentation. Same thing for video and audio. Automatic captions are a very good start, although Ideally, you should also go back and check to see if it was correct, because there can be mistakes, of course. But also, AI agents, AI tools allow for faster access to guidance on accessibility principles and also accessibility analysis. So really, we should be friends. We should be hand in hand. One thing helps the other helps the one. There's a lot of synergy that's possible here. What we do as accessibility people and what you can do as accessibility to interact with AI, you can use AI to review specs and plans. It's okay. I understand that a lot of people might not be very knowledgeable about accessibility principles, and you still need to write out specs for some features or plans for development. Well, if you have an AI tool accessible to you, then you can give it the description of what you're making, and you can ask, hey, analyze this, what I'm trying to build from an accessibility perspective. Can you find what kinds of users might be negatively affected by it? What should we pay more attention to when developing? This is something that you can get very fast results through AI, and it can help you iterate on your work and build something that's truly accessible. But of course, you need to double check. Of course, you should use AI to review code as well. You can use that whenever you're writing a code by yourself or when you're reviewing your colleague's code, you can go and ask, highlight any accessibility problems in this component or in this feature and propose some solutions. And you will get some pretty timely answers. A lot of the time, it's good stuff, not always. So you still need to be vigilant about it as well. How do we get informative feedback better out of AI tools when it comes to accessibility? You should use certain phrases. I encourage you to use something like this when talking to AI about accessibility. First of all, you can highlight exactly what sort of accessibility features you want it to review. Make sure all content has text representation and all interactive elements can be used with just a keyboard. That really helps guide the AI into the right path for reviewing your code, for example. Or base your analysis on WCAG 2.2 AA guidelines. This is a good one because if you just ask about accessibility, it can take any sort of information. But when we refer back to these specific guidelines that AI is aware of, just because of the training data most of the time, then it can give you much more detailed point by point explanations of what is good and what is bad. And you can tell it that for each accessibility problem, explain which specific WCAG criterion it relates to. So that when it comes back and says that, oh, for example, this part of your interface is in violation of 1.1.1, for example, then you can use this information to go back to the WCAG website, read what that success criterion means, see what are examples of how to make it better, and just better understand the problem and the solution. And always remember to verify manually. AI will hallucinate, it will make mistakes. So will I. Accessibility questions often also just don't have one correct objective solution. It often very much depends on what kind of application you're building, what are your users like, and so on and so forth. And AI just doesn't have the full context of who you are, what it is you're making, and who it is for. So, how can you get started with this tomorrow? Hopefully, you are a little bit inspired. Hopefully, you see why accessibility is necessary and important. How can you get started tomorrow? Baby steps. You go to work tomorrow, for example, the smallest thing that you can do to become more aware of accessibility is just to try using your computer with just a keyboard. See what are the obstacles. Learn what are the keys that maybe you are not aware of that help you use the computer with just a keyboard. And that really opens you up to so much information. Start reviewing your own work for accessibility, whether you're an engineer, a designer, or a product person. Take a look at what you're building and think what here might be related to accessibility. And then you can go and research how to make it better or what are the parts that you already did right. And a little bit bigger next step is to learn about screen reader software. So if you're using a MacBook, macOS comes with VoiceOver pre-installed, and there's a lot of good content online on how to use VoiceOver, and this can help you really level up your understanding of accessibility and see what it is like to build interfaces that are accessible and what are the problems in interfaces that aren't. And on Windows, you can use NVDA. I think the free version has some limits, but it's good to get started anyway. And if you're still interested, if you want to go even more, you can proactively educate yourself on accessibility and how your role flips into accessibility. I've just listed few resources here. You can start by Googling them and looking at that. DQ University has a lot of very good content for accessibility professionals from the very beginning to very advanced level. W3C website has all of the raw information. This is where all of this comes from. So this is really where you can go to see the authoritative, kind of like the main content. And then you can also follow people and organizations that champion accessibility online. I've only put a couple of names here. You can find them on X, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Vitaly Friedman, Sarah Sweden, Charlotte Riggle, they're great. They share a lot of very valuable knowledge, insights, articles about accessibility all the time. Vitaly is a bit more on the design side. Sarah is a bit more on the engineering side, and Charlotte shares a lot about a lot different stuff. And if that's still not enough of you, you can, and I encourage you to make accessibility a core part of your work. You can start talking about accessibility with your colleagues, start championing it in your organization. And if that's still not enough of you, you can also become a certified accessibility specialist. There are different certifications available. You can take an exam, you'll get a cool little thing on your CV, and this really will upgrade your knowledge of accessibility to very high levels. Last thing that I want to point out, and this is taken directly from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, where it says that even content that conforms at the highest level, AAA of WCAG, it will not be accessible to individuals with all types, degrees, or combinations of disability. There is no objective, like one specific answer to every accessibility situation. It is a complex, ongoing, and evolving work. If you get involved with it, and I hope you do, it requires a lot of empathy for yourself, for users, and for the technology as well, actually. Many situations will not be easy. They will not have easy prepared solutions. You will have to think, you will have to discuss, and you will have to disagree with other people who also have the best in mind, but just from a different perspective, maybe. It's important to know that the end goal is not to tick off points on a list. It's not to tick off all the WCAG acceptance criteria. The end goal is a more equitable, fair, and accessible world for everyone, regardless of their ability or disability. So let's make it happen together, all of us. That's it. That's the presentation. Thank you so much, and we can go into questions.
Thank you, Stepan. I really like this presentation. I even learned some new thing from it and really like it. And I have one question because it was about 10 years ago when the mobile's first approach became a standard for front-end developers. And what do you think it will be a day someday when accessibility first approach will be a standard and everyone will start thinking about the accessibility from the very beginning of building applications? What do you think?
I think this is something that has really evolved a lot in the last 5 to 10 years, really, because I started building websites and web applications about 15 years ago or something like that. And I think we were doing good work, genuinely. I think the company and the people that I worked with were great. Looking back at it, there were some things that we did that we didn't even think of as accessibility, but it was accessibility in the end. So, for example, about 15 years ago, you couldn't use any random font on the web. There were only specific fonts that you could use. And if you wanted to make your design stand out, often what people would do is they would write the text in Photoshop, for example, in that font, and then save it as an image and then put it on the website. But we talked about this. This is non-text content. So what we did already early on with that company, with these people, is to try to make text the front and center of everything, and also to structure our information in a way that made sense. But back then, I didn't know that it's accessibility. I'm not sure if my colleagues did either. In the last about 5 years, I think there has been much more discussion about accessibility everywhere in the software world. And it's becoming much more, well, accessible, actually, funnily enough. There's much more courses already now, and a lot of big companies are hiring accessibility specialists and engineers to to be like the first front of how to make their stuff more accessible. It is an up and down battle. It goes better, it goes not so good sometimes, but I really believe that already now we are in a place where it is becoming much more important, also because of the laws, partially, but also because of how accessible and popular information about this is. So I really want to hope that it is very soon becoming part of like the baseline of what we consider quality in software engineering.
Cool. We have one question on the chat. Uh, I can read. Ola asks, I am a UX designer and have complete digital accessibility training, but still looking to gain hands-on experience in a real work environment. Curious to learn from Stepan. Does your team run testing sessions with disabled users? And if so, how often and how deep do they go?
Mhm. So specifically in our team, we have run tests with real disabled users, and we have used a service for that called Fable, Fable. Um, the way that works is that they help connect you to users who are very experienced in using some specific accessibility technology, like a screen reader or voice control or something like this. And the way that we have done that is to essentially have an interview with the user. They can use some part of the application that we're working on, and we give them, some guidelines that, okay, we want you to go and make these changes to the UI, and then they come back with well, they don't come back to this on a call, for example. They try to do that. They explain what they think should happen, what is working, what is not working, so on. We've kind of done it ad hoc, honestly. It's not like a very by the schedule process right now. And how deep they go really depends on what you're building. Because I think what makes sense is to focus on one specific aspect. You can Okay, so less often you can do a thing where you just have a free-form interview with a disabled user, and then you get their feedback on everything that is concerning the application. But probably what you should do a bit more often is to have a specific area that you're working on, hopefully before it's delivered, before it's shipped, and you can have them work on that specific area and get their feedback on this. Um, so there are certain services that allow you to do that, that connect you with disabled users. But also what I've had some people do, not at work, but online, I've talked to some people who have reached out to local, how should I say, groups, right? So for example, in Estonia, we have a couple of these like blind people associations. So you can reach out to those groups and ask if they could refer you to someone who could help understand better the impact of accessibility. And there's often people who are very passionate about it. They are really want to share their expertise, and they really benefit from you also wanting to build more accessible experiences. So they could agree to have a call with you, for example, or some kind of a meeting where you can go over these things and get their feedback on it.
Okay, and it was based on something like, I don't know, user story that you ask this native disability tester to, for example, check some stuff or go through our website and try to find this or this.
Yeah, so I think the most useful is if you come up with a scenario. So, for example, let's say you're building some kind of a hotel website, right? So you would go to them with a specific scenario already prepared, and you would tell them that I want you to try to find a hotel room for, let's say, 2 weeks from now for 3 days, and it should be a room with on the first floor. And then they try to complete these actions in your interface, and the entire time they should be also talking you through it, like, okay, what they think will happen, what they think should go, and what is not working. And when you're doing these interviews, it's very important not to guide them too much. The scenario that you come with should be pretty high level. Like, this is your goal, this is what you want to achieve. But you shouldn't be telling them how to achieve it because this kind of like defeats the purpose. They should be able to find the information, they should be able to interact with controls, and they should be able to do these actions without you saying, like, no, 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 you have to press a button that says this, this, this.